Welcome back to the Smarter Marketer podcast, brought to you by Rocket Agency. I'm your host, James Lawrence. So welcome back to the Smarter Marketer podcast. Today, I am very happy to be joined by my much older brother, David. David, on the back of the rampant success of our first pod together, we're going in for our second. So today, we want to dig into the topic of what percentage of a company's revenue should be spent on marketing, and trying not to come at it from a self-serving, we're marketers, we're an agency, spend as much as you can, but just a mature discussion about, I guess, what we see our best clients doing, how to balance running a business versus running a marketing department, and what is an appropriate amount of money to spend on marketing. So Dave, welcome back to the pod.
Thank you. It's great to be here again. Is it true that we broke the internet in our last episode? Is that true?
Yep, mum and dad have been listening incessantly on to our first pod. So I think first of all, it'd be good to, we've both, I guess, done some research coming into the pod, and we do have some numbers in, these industries, a certain percentage are in B2B versus B2C. But I think the kind of most interesting thing to start off with is what expenses are we talking about when we talk about what percentage of your revenue should go into marketing? So, I mean, what would you say is kind of reasonable there?
Yeah, this is interesting. And I guess you're going to share your research in a second, but I was really blown away by your research. For me, it's pretty simple for our own marketing, and I think for the marketing for lots of our clients is that your marketing budget is the money you spend on headcount that's a portion to the marketing effort of the business, plus, of course, any money that you're spending on your media to run your campaigns, print material that's being used on the marketing side of the business. And of course, there's grey area that makes it a bit hard. Some activities, sort of marketing, sort of sales, particularly if you're doing account-based marketing or something like that, it can become quite grey. But for me, it's working out the absolute or the prorated people and expenses that are going towards marketing the business.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think we one of the pieces that I was reading was looking through publicly available annual reports of big listed companies in the States, and they all account for things slightly differently, as you'd expect. A lot of them have amalgamated sales and marketing budgets. They have weird kind of line items around admin and administration. And they were kind of, one of the stats that I thought was interesting was less than half of the companies in this particular study included expenses for marketing employees in their marketing budgets. Often companies would put marketing employee expenses into general and admin expenses, sales, other areas. So I think it is just important to make sure that you're kind of putting in expenses that are genuinely marketing. I get that depending on the structure and setup of particular businesses, it's going to be hard to totally get it right. But I think as long as we're talking from the same kind of baseline.
Yeah, that's it. I think it's kind of accounting trickery, isn't it? If you decided to employ a paid search specialist in-house, and as such, you weren't going to include them in your marketing budget. But had you made the decision to outsource that work to an agency, then it would be in your marketing budget. That doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, that's it. I think it's total cost of an employee, all expenses connected to that.
Yep.
Because it's the same you're going to be paying on the other side, and that would make sense to me. In terms of the topic itself, I think why are we talking a percentage rather than an actual dollar figure when it comes to what percentage of your revenue should go into marketing?
Yeah. So for me, marketing's it's very much the engine that drives your future revenue, future sales, future leads. As you become a larger organisation, the number of leads or sales, actual revenue that you're going to need simply grow. So if you were to do a set number, what worked for you as a $10 million business isn't going to work so well for you as a $100 million business. A percentage just makes it easier. It means it scales, and I think as the business does scale, you're going to find ledgers, right? You're going to find some bits where you haven't ramped up your headcount in marketing or your agency environment, so probably your marketing spend as a percentage does drop a little bit. But I find typically companies feel that. They suddenly feel that the amount of revenue they need simply can't be driven on the marketing engine they built themselves a year ago or 2 years ago or 3 years ago. So they have to ramp it up and sort of almost compensate for that change. But yeah, a percentage makes sense. Because business sizes change.
Yeah, totally. And if you're growing, it's just natural that number moves, right? What and I mean, this might be an obvious question, but like, why does the size of marketing spend matter?
Size of marketing spend matters because it's going to influence the sort of company you have in the future, and it's a little bit of is what I referred to before about it being the engine of your future revenue. But it gets even more subtle than that, where let's say you're under investing in marketing relative to your competition and for the business goals you have, then not only will you be introducing fewer people to your business, but the fact that you've introduced fewer people means that when your sales team go out to sell a product, if it's being sold in that way, or when your website's doing the work and selling a product or selling a service, you're going to have to be pretty price competitive because you have so few opportunities to make a sale. You've got to make everyone a winner. And that has massive implications on a business. So if you decide to go down that path of not having many opportunities and you therefore have to price in a really competitive way, you're going to have a business that has relatively low margins and all the things that go along with that kind of business. Whereas if you over-generate your opportunities, this is whether you're a service business or product business, whether you're B2B or B2C, it doesn't really matter. If you over-generate opportunities, you get to specialize. You can say, well, we're only going to take on work that fits this particular criteria. Or you can say, we're going to take on all kinds of work, but we're only going to take on work where the margin's fantastic.
Yeah.
You've got a company that's really comfortable and profitable. Or you can aggressively go into spaces that are really hard, really competitive spaces you may not be in. If you can get your marketing engine really flying, you have a bit of a head start in some of those ultra competitive type areas. So, so that's why what you actually invest in marketing matters. And anyone that's ever worked in a company that underinvested in marketing or did poor marketing knows what that feels like.
Yeah.
Scraping around for the next sale.
That's it. I had a mutual friend of ours in the pod last week, Ashton, and he's one of the leading kind of marketing strategists in Australia, and he was making that point that there is a very strong correlation between an overinvestment, sensibly, in marketing and margin, which is kind of the way you framed it makes total sense, but it is an interesting connection, right?
Yeah.
Marketing aggressively compared to the competition and charge a price premium, underinvest, and you're kind of taking on everything you can possibly get.
Yeah, that's it. And I think often this conversation about marketing budget and percentage, it comes from one of two places. It comes from a marketer who wants to make sure that they're spending the right amount of money, or typically if you're the head of marketing, you want to probably spend a bit more money on marketing. So you're looking to see if your business is currently under-investing as a percentage, and the C-suite tend to love a good number or a percentage, and so it feels like a great way to pitch the request to increase investment. But it also often happens the other way, which is you've got someone in the C-suite who's looking to save money. And the reality is that there are people that see marketing as an expense to be cut, no different to cleaning or power or IT supplies.
Yep.
And they want to cut it, particularly when times get tough. And so you do get that genuine tension between people that understand that the money they invest in quality marketing today literally is the connection with the future comfort of their business versus those that don't. So it's an interesting conversation that, yeah, you get people looking for the percentage to argue it's too high or it's too low.
Yeah. That's it. We did a lot of research when COVID hit and going back through tough economic trading periods, not just in Australia, but America and Europe, going back into the 20s. And the objective research and the objective data showed that businesses that continued to invest in marketing when times were tough would come out a hell of a lot stronger than those that didn't. And we saw that. We saw that budgets in 2021 as a percentage of revenue dropped for marketing departments, and some of the data we'll go through shortly. And I think we'll find once again that the businesses that stayed the course and were willing to invest in the future will find that they then come out of those periods much more strongly. When you could. And there were certainly businesses so impacted by COVID that it made no sense but to batten down the hatches. But for businesses that could keep trading, often cutting your marketing or halving it or whatever it might be is pretty short-sighted. What I wanted to discuss was because we're going to jump into percentages on B2B versus B2C in different industries and big companies and small, but whether it's 5%, 10, 15, 20 in a particular industry or segment, when is a standard range not necessarily a good guide for a particular business?
Yeah, that's a good question. A standard range is only a good guide if you're a standard company and you've got standard competition and things have been pretty stable.
Yep.
There aren't too many areas of marketing or business where you can sort of color by numbers kind of stuff. So the standouts though, let's say you're a business that's in a highly competitive field. So let's say you're spending 10% on your marketing, but your competitors are spending 20%. Sadly, you don't really get to make that decision about 10% anymore. If you want to actually get your share of market, you're going to have to start matching them. So ignore the standards if your direct competitors are playing differently. if you're wanting to be a fast growth company, then you'll have to spend more than you would be. It's pretty common sense, right? You have to spend more than you would if you were simply wanting it to be business as usual for yourself.
Yep.
For that reason, we see startups always have to spend more than that. And good marketing, sadly, is probably more important than good product when it comes to startup territory. There's so many books written on that very topic. You have to get the word out there, and you have to get it out there with the right message. So if you're a startup, you've got to invest really heavily. Similarly, if you're a stable business but you're about to make a change, you introduce new products or services, or you want to grow market share, you're going to have to spend more money. It's as simple as that to achieve those things. Otherwise, you'll find that you take that pivot and nothing happens, or things don't happen as quickly as you want. So increasing your marketing spend kind of buys you into that future situation a whole bunch quicker.
That's it. I kind of feel that we've seen that Silicon Valley kind of model where it is, don't worry about the revenue, worry about the growth and the users and whatever the numbers in a particular business are. And the idea that those businesses would be sticking to these types of percentages is just not reality. To your point, I think we're talking about businesses that are mature, are in an industry that's kind of doing its thing, and you just got looking for steady growth, not revolutionary growth.
But the numbers we've got here are averages. So, let's say there's an industry where the average is 12%. I guarantee there's going to be some companies spending a whole lot less than that, and I guarantee there's going to be some companies spending a whole lot more than that.
Yeah.
And I guess the other factor that influences whether you're going to be in the range or not is the quality of your marketing. So if your marketing is poor, you could be spending 2 or 3 times more than everyone else in the industry for the same or even less results. So as always, marketing is highly competitive and challenging, and getting your marketing right is priceless when it comes to determining what percentage you should be spending.
And I think the natural inclination, like a lot of the tension I think that we see between marketing teams and CEO type level or board level is that they kind of want both. It's like 10% is the rule of thumb in a particular industry. So let's put 5% towards it, and you guys just do a 200% better job than the competition. And I don't think that's how it works. I think it's spend what you got to spend and just do it really, really well to get your growth.
Yeah, so, for sure.
Cool. Let's unpack the industries. Maybe we start talking just some stats that we found in reference to an article that we'll connect with the notes. I think the first is just across all businesses, what do we see generally as a rule of thumb in terms of spend of revenue into marketing?
Yeah, I mean, as with all things with economists, it's hard to get consensus, but around that sort of 10 to 12 or 13% seems to be considered standard. So if that's the percentage of your overall revenue you're spending on marketing, you're in that standard range.
Yeah. So you're a $10 million business spending $1 million a year on marketing.
That's right. That's right. 1 to 1.2, 1.3.
Yeah, cool. And then generally speaking, B2B versus B2C, what are we seeing?
So again, it's going to depend heavily on the type of business. There's also a distinction between whether it's a product business or a service business.
Yep.
So B2B product often is spending more around that sort of 10% mark. Whereas if we're looking at B2B service, the studies are showing that it's more around the 15% type mark. And similarly, if you're B2C product, they came in highest in some of these surveys, above 18% of their spend, whereas B2C service was more around that 10% kind of mark. So interestingly, and you never know whether there's a variable because of simply the survey that's been done and who's been in it, but in the analysis that we saw, you're actually seeing B2B product and B2B, so B2B product and B2C service were both around 10%. So B2B sort of a swap, whether it was product or service. So a little bit of a difference there.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I pulled some data which we'll attach to the pod where you kind of consumer packaged goods, kind of much at the higher end of the scale, 24%, which kind of makes sense. Consumer services, 15%, tech software, 15%. So they're kind of at the upper end. And then you can look at the very bottom end. You're looking at energy, 4%, manufacturing, 8%, transportation, 8%. I feel that this data useful for business owners, C-suite, useful for CMOs, marketing departments, because it just adds some objectivity to it, right? Are we B2B? Are we B2C? Are we in tech? Are we in professional services? Are we in a kind of segment that doesn't really need marketing? But it's pretty clear. You're spending generally around 10, and then you might be down to 5, you might be up to 20, and then there's some outliers either side. But if you're not in those ranges, then you're probably underinvesting in marketing?
Yeah, that's it. And I think sometimes these big variations that you see in the ranges, a lot of it comes down to the audience that you're trying to market to. So if you've got a really large audience, you're going to be spending a lot of money on awareness, and that can be, as we know, incredibly expensive. And digital obviously can make that a bit more measurable and a bit more effective, but it can still be quite effective. Whereas if you have a relatively small audience, then suddenly your sales team can often be quite heavily involved in that awareness piece, because you might only have a known market of 250 contacts. If you're dealing with enterprise corporations, you may not be doing any general large-scale marketing at all. It can all be very, very sort of focused on the actual targets that you need to deal with.
Yeah, that's it. We pulled some numbers from some kind of, I guess, some household names, and it's kind of fascinating. And these are sales and marketing budgets, so we probably don't have total clarity as to what sits where. Google's spending 12% in sales and marketing activity. Apple's spending 6%, which is, I think, is kind of probably lower than I would have expected. One that's just fascinating is Salesforce spending 46% of revenue goes into sales and marketing activity.
Wow.
Microsoft, and they're growing fast as well. Microsoft 16%, Oracle 22%. You kind of see there your tech businesses that need to get a message out there, spending pretty heavily. Google, which probably hasn't done much above the line stuff until more recently, particularly in Australia, still spending 12%, where their actual sales operations you'd think are pretty minor compared to the spend on marketing.
They're really interesting numbers. I think, first of all, you always have to question how these different corporations account for things and how transparent they are. But I suspect that churn is a really interesting thing here. So if you've got a company like Apple that's invested so heavily in their brand and in differentiating their products from their competitors' products, I think they retain their customers well. They charge a hefty premium on their products, and their marketing is to sort of enforce that brand, but they're not necessarily on a heavy customer acquisition kind of path in their marketing, whereas Salesforce is operating in an incredibly competitive space where the number of CRM platforms that have come up in the last 5 years is just staggering. I would imagine Salesforce have an incredible churn rate with their clients, and they're constantly trying to also, of course, take clients off their competitors. It must be an expensive space to be playing in at the moment.
Yeah. And I guess you get scale, right? Like they've been around for a long time, and they have the scale now where to add each user onto the platform doesn't kind of have that incremental cost that that it once would.
Yeah.
In terms of the next area I kind of wanted to dig into, just around the increasing, decreasing marketing budgets, like how can you do it easily, quickly, short-term versus long-term, kind of your perspective on that?
Yeah, so I guess there's some things that scale really nicely. So media spend tends to scale pretty nicely. It's, you can put your assets together for your campaigns and scale up the amount of media you invest in it. It can be quite effective depending on how you've structured things. People can be a whole lot harder. Obviously, there's the constant, and I know you've got episodes on this, there's that constant discussion between whether you want to in-house something or outsource things to an agency. If you're keeping positions in-house and trying to grow, that can be quite challenging, particularly in the current market where it's really tough to get your hands on good marketers. So agencies can provide an easy way to scale. So we certainly have clients who have come on board with us quite openly saying, we intend to bring this in-house in a year or 2 years' time, but we're going to make sure we set it up properly and we get good eyes on it to start with. And sometimes those relationships do go that way and they end up bringing it back in-house, but quite often they really love that flexibility of being able to alter their spend in different quarters or different years, depending on what they need with us, without having to worry about the recruitment kind of headache.
Yeah.
And other times it does go completely it's sort of horses for courses, but I think that's the plan. I think you've got to look at what you want marketing to achieve over a certain time frame, and then look at the levers you've got to play with. And some of those will go up and down very quickly, and some of them won't. You've got to really plan for them.
Yeah. And if you're an in-house marketer listening to the pod who feels that the marketing budgets you've been given just aren't enough based on the industry you're in, based on whether it's a fast-growing business or it's in a space where businesses are spending 15% typically and you're only spending 5 or 10, how any tips, tricks, insights into how you would try to mount those arguments internally to open up more budget?
Yeah, absolutely. So if your competitors are publicly listed companies, you can get involved in the extraordinarily fun research downloading annual reports.
Yep.
And they'll be publishing a fair bit of data that'll help you get a feel for it. Most people don't have that luxury. They're competing against privately held companies where that data is not available. But there's some great insight tools available. We use SEMrush for all of our campaigns. All our specialists are on SEMrush all the time, and they've got some tools that estimate the value of paid media campaigns, but they can also estimate the value of the organic campaigns that are being run as well if they were paid campaigns. There's other specialist platforms that look into that. Now, they're all using external data sources. People aren't handing out, and Facebook aren't handing out their revenue details, but they're using amounts of traffic and number of times that ads are shown, all that kind of stuff. So that can be a brilliant insight. You can also just get a feel by doing things like going into Facebook if you're competing in that space and having a look at the ads that are being run by your competitors, and you'll start to get a feel for the complexity. And of course, once you visit sites, you'll be retargeted and remarketed, and you can see what people are doing. I think probably they're the main two things that kind of jump to mind.
I think I'd add to that, agree with both of those. I think LinkedIn's good. I think looking at your competition and looking at what sort of roles they have inside the business. Are you looking at a marketing team of 10, 15 staff and you're kind of at 5, trying to punch in company name and case study or marketing agency or SEO agency, and looking if you can find examples of, so you can get a bit of a handle on what sort of agencies are they using or what sort of work are they doing. I think the data and sources that I found useful preparing for this, there's Gartner's done a lot of work in interviewing CMOs and marketers and looking at what percentage of marketing, what marketing budget is a percentage of total revenue. And I think just trying to strip anything internal away from it and just saying objectively to your board or to the person responsible for budgets, just so you know that, we're a B2B and we're a product company and we're in tech. This is what the competition is typically spending, and this is kind of the items they're spending it on. And I think there's some really good Gartner research. That was the one that I referred to earlier, where we kind of saw spend. That the one that I'm looking at now is spend has typically jumped 10, 11, 12, 11, 11, 10, 11, and then dropped back in 2021 just after COVID.
Yeah.
Kind of interesting, and depending, they've got a lot of good industry stuff as well that kind of breaks it into consumer, financial, healthcare, retail, travel and hospo, media, manufacturing. So if you kind of want to just pull out broad buckets, the Gartner research is quite good. I think in terms of your article that you put together, that's on the Rocket website, the sources there, that was Deloitte, wasn't it? The CMO survey?
Yeah, that's right. Hey, back to that point you mentioned before about what do you do for an in-house marketer and you feel you haven't got sufficient marketing budget to achieve the KPIs you've been set. The number one thing you should do is be ready to speak up. There's no point at all in waiting a year, missing the targets, and then telling people you weren't given enough money. And I think often it can be easy in any role to feel like you're a bit of an order taker, and you've really got to step out of that mindset and step into a business mindset where you may not win the discussion, but quality people will appreciate the fact you've raised it. If you go to your boss and they may in turn go to their boss with a really well-considered argument that shows the sort of research that you've suggested, and I think that LinkedIn suggestion is fantastic. If you're a team of 5 people doing marketing with some really skinny budgets to agencies, and you've checked in LinkedIn and you know your competitor's got a team of 20 people in-house and you found them as award-winning case studies on a whole bunch of agencies' websites, the people that make the decisions in your company should be aware that they're not going to win the battle, and they should be aware of that as soon as possible. So they might make the decision to leave the spend where it is, but at least you told them the impact you think that's going to have.
That's it. You're just creating a rod for your own back. If you're an order taker and you give it a budget of X and your gut says, I can't actually achieve what I need to with this budget, it's kind of your fault, really. Like, I think it's, if you go to the powers that be and explain that based on market research, based on objective data, it's an underinvestment in marketing to achieve the goals that need to be hit. It's on that stakeholder to say, well, that's fine, but let's see how we go. But if you take the budget and put your plan together and don't hit it, well, you've bought into that yourself.
Yeah, that's it. One of the Rocket values is do what's right, and there's an obvious part of that, which is do the right thing by clients, be ethical. It's obviously really important, but it all almost sort of goes without saying. But I think the part of that value that resonates with me is the second part of it, which is say what's right. So once you've figured out what the right and the wrong thing is, you have a responsibility to your colleagues and to your clients and the people around you that you'll have the courage to actually speak up and let people know. And it doesn't mean you're always going to get your way, but you at least have to make sure that nothing's left unsaid.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So I think that's it's kind of a nice way to wrap it out. In terms of always finish the pod with a question around what bit of advice would you give to a marketer, wanting to succeed and grow in their career. I think maybe as it pertains to this topic, I think you answered that question last time, but what is that one piece of advice you'd give to a marketer that wants to get that is a big concern that they're not, that the amount of money they're being given in their marketing budget just isn't enough to compete in their segment?
Yeah, my advice would be on preparing for the discussion. So it's a given you've got to have a discussion, but my advice would be preparing for that discussion. So doing the research and getting people on site and knowing where you're coming from, knowing that it's not some massive empire building push, but you genuinely care about the future of the company. And if it's underfunded in marketing, there's a direct connection from that to being unable to hit the goal. So doing your research, doing your preparation, and then speaking up.
I think that's really good. And it's funny, I asked the question of every guest on the pod the first time they come on, and at least half of the responses have been speak the same language, talk the same metrics as the business, not marketing. And I think it's just that you have, as a marketer, if you want to succeed, you've got to connect marketing into the business, and it's got to be revenue, right? How are we driving revenue? And it's a very mature conversation to have with the powers that be. If you do, it's your responsibility to speak up, and don't do it based on a whim or based on what you think, but base it on actual macro data.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. It's fantastic.
Awesome. Well, Dave, thanks for coming onto the pod. We'll get you back again as long as we get enough listens on this pod.
Dad, everyone, come on, listen. Excellent content.
Okay, awesome. Thanks for your time, Dave.
Thanks, James. That's great.